Sanskrit words today that are entering the English lexicon, like mantra, right? Now a company motto is their mantra, right? Or dharma, guru, many of these words, yoga. I'm not sure if satsang has made it yet. So for those of you who are new, I want to say that satsang means a gathering that is dedicated to higher truth. That people come together with an intention to lift up their hearts and their minds, to be receptive to and aware of higher truth than just, the news, right? Or conditions in the world. So satsang means people coming together in this spirit to cultivate spiritual awareness, spiritual consciousness. So that's what we're doing. When we have satsang on Sunday morning, Sunday afternoon, we're coming together in such a way that our intention is to change our consciousness. Sometimes we get mired in the world. It's not a new problem, it's a problem of the human condition. So we come together as remedy for that. We meditate together, we sing, we pray, we listen to something positive, uplifting, we share with others on the path. So that is our opportunity here. And I'm really grateful for it, aren't you? Just, we need more intentional satsang in our life, really, we do. So in our monthly satsangs, I put together this series to speak about the life of Paramahansa Yogananda, and in particular, lessons that I learned from his life, besides the fundamental spiritual lessons, of course, there's lessons from how he lived, through stories that I heard from my own teacher, who is his disciple, and lessons that I learned from observing his life and how he lived and how he did what he did. And we were, blessed, of course, with that, to have these new books out about his life. One of them, which of course I highly recommend, is The Life of Yogananda, the story of the yogi who became the first modern guru. The story of Yogananda's life, and this is written by Philip Goldberg, principally about, after the time when he comes to America. And so there are many stories in there about him as a man, besides being a mystic and a spiritual sage. What was it like for him to run an organization? And then, as Reverend Hayes mentioned, my teacher has revised his book, The Life of Yogananda, Paramahansa Yogananda as I Knew Him. So it's a good satsang to read those books for summer reading, to just immerse ourselves in a life that is an inspiration. So the last lesson I want to talk about today in this series of 5 lessons is that I observed in him, in his life, and of course I observe in my teacher, which is be steadfast. And we often hear that as a prayer in our tradition, which is, may you be steadfast on the path of spiritual awakening. And certainly, when you look at the life of Paramahansa Yogananda, and you look at this young 27-year-old man who crossed the oceans in a boat, taking months to get here, to a land that he'd never been to, with a language he didn't know, with a strong intentionality, who built an organization and a work that, has touched millions of lives. Now, during that process, of course, he had to be steadfast, right? And I think for any of us, that is a necessary ingredient to having a meaningful, soul-inspired, successful, prosperous, joyful life. We want that. We have to be committed to it, don't we? Otherwise, it's too easy to slide down into, ain't it awful? Ain't it hard? So, in order to live this meaningful, soulful life of faith, we have to be steadfast about it, to be committed to it. And that's really what I see in his life. You know, he was such a strong teacher and strong leader in his organization. And he was, he lived his life with, I would call it, it's hardly a strong enough word to describe it, but I would say a bold faith, a radical faith, an outrageous faith. That somehow he was willing to stand on, and that commitment that he had to stand in that faith in the infinite, his faith in God, allowed his life, his very being, to be used as a divine instrument in such a powerful way. And, you know, when students would ask him, you know, well, how he did things, he would say, the same God that is in me is in you. And, you know, he didn't have more God than the rest of us. And he was very clear about that. But what he did have that I think we can come up on is his faith in the infinite and his steadfast commitment to relying on that. One of the stories that I was enjoying looking at the other night was about when you know, he was led out to California. Makes perfect sense to us. And everywhere he went, students were gathering around. But, you know, he had no money, and no one was backing this grand experiment and this teaching, which surely it felt the time had come, but it was the 1920s. Bringing yoga to America was a bold idea. And so there's a part in Phil's book where it talks about Yogananda knowing that they're going to have a place for the ministry, they're going to have a home. And I'll read this little passage to you. It says, Yogananda says, "We'll have a big place on a mountain," he told one of his early classes. One of the students, perhaps doing a quick calculation based on local economics, said, "Well, maybe if you stay here 20 years, you can have a center like that." To which Yogananda replied, 20 years for those who think 20 years. 20 months for those who think 20 months. 3 months for those who think 3 months. And Phil comments, he was in the 3-month camp. So he said, Yogananda said, "You must not let your life run in the ordinary way. Do something that nobody else has done, something that will dazzle the world. Show that God's creative principle works in you. Now, there is no other way to do that. Whether your dazzling is something that you're doing with your own family at home, whether your dazzling is out there in the world, the only way to do that is to be steadfastly connected to the truth of your own being, that God is your life. And nothing can separate you from that. So when I think of being steadfast, I think about the way that that has changed for me over time through the teachings in our tradition. And that is, when I was a child, growing up in my family, being steadfast meant the kind of Winston Churchill steadfast, which was good. It was like never, 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 never give up. But it had a sense of push your way through, right? Get it done. Now, we all need some of that in life to reach our goals and to get things done. And Yogananda had plenty of that. He did not lack any of that kind of willpower and determination to see things through. And it's clear that it wasn't easy for him. And he told people that, he said God always came through, but sometimes, not till the last minute. But he never lost faith that God would come through. And that was the difference in what I learned about being steadfast. So I learned that the shift that we make, that is absolutely essential to having a meaningful, joyful life, is that the steadfast that we're about is our steadfast commitment to realize that God is our life. And that we are opening ourselves up to being outrageous instruments for the divine. We're not standing there all alone, pushing ahead with the will of the ego. But our being steadfast is our steadfast commitment to be awake to the radical truth of our life. And I want to share with you a favorite quote that I actually keep out in my office at home, and I look at it a lot. It's a quote, and I really don't even know if it's really by him, but someone gave it to me, and it has his name on it, by the sage Ramana Maharshi. This is what I think about when I think about being steadfast, and the primary teaching that Yogananda showed us about that. Place your burden at the feet of the Lord of the universe, who accomplishes everything. Place your burden at the feet of the Lord of the universe, who accomplishes everything. Remain all the time steadfast in the heart, in the transcendental absolute. Remain all the time steadfast in the heart, in the transcendental absolute. God knows the past, present, and future. God will determine the future for you and accomplish the work. What is to be done will be done at the proper time. Don't worry. Abide in the heart and surrender your acts to the divine. So sometimes, I have to remind myself about this practice. What is to be done will be done at the proper time. And my work of being steadfast is to do it in the right way. What's the point of being steadfast to pushing something through and losing our soul in the process? That's really the whole, as I see it, of being steadfast in the spiritual life, is steadfast to our commitment to live boldly, to do what we're here to do, to enjoy it completely, by never losing touch with the soul. The beautiful verse by Abu Sa'id, the Sufi mystic, the goal to buy and sell in the marketplace and never once lose sight of God. That's what being steadfast looks like. If you want it to be 20 years, it can be 20 years. 20 months, 20 months. 3 months, 3 months. That's our choice. So this afternoon, I'll talk a little bit more about how we do that. It really, according to the teachings of yoga, it's fairly simple. We have a choice all the time for our attention, our awareness, basically moves in two directions. It either moves inward to be anchored in the divine self, to be anchored in the heart, in the awareness of that transcendental absolute God that is everywhere and within us. It can move that way. You know what I mean? Like when you're awake, aware, at peace, feel connected to yourself, to all of life. You know that, right? We have 3 people in the second row who know that. So our attention can go there, to be anchored in that awareness. And we have practices that help us with that, like our meditation, like coming to a satsang, right? Maybe gardening. Attention flows within, and we're anchored in the transcendental absolute. That's one direction. The other direction is our attention flows out and gets all involved in stuff and people and things and the thoughts swirling around in our own head. That's the other direction. Now, we tend to be steadfast in direction number 2. Being all involved. And we began with the prayer today, "O Lord, lead us from the unreal to the real." What does that prayer mean? It means, help me not get too caught up in all those things that change all the time. All those things I think about, worry about, those are all the things that change. And yes, they need attention, but they don't need all of our attention. So, lead me from the unreal to the real, to being steadfast in the heart, in that deeper awareness of the truth of my being, and that divine connection that is always there. That's what it is to be steadfast. And does it look like a steady state? No. Looks like kind of an alternating frequency. Right? Well, we just want to tune up our spiritual frequency. So more and more we are steadfast in the heart, in the transcendental absolute. We're remembering the truth about life, the truth about what we are. Because forgetting the truth about what we are is really painful. It hurts us and it hurts everyone around us. We get crazy. You know, we hold on to things. We struggle. When we come back to ourselves and we can have this broader view of life that helps us remember what we care most deeply about and not lose our soul in the process of living every day. Now, it's getting time for me to conclude. I have so much to share. You'll have to come this afternoon to get the part 2, some practices. Someone sent me this poem by Rilke, and it's a beautiful, beautiful poem. So I want to share it with you on this topic of being steadfast. It's a little bit anthropomorphized, I have to say. You know, kind of like having God take our hand. But it's poetry. So don't worry about that part, okay? You know, it's the meaning of it, the heart of it that we want to touch. The experience of it. What is poetry? What is the meaning of poetry? The experience of it is the meaning. What it's pointing to. Okay. God speaks to each one of us as God makes us, then walks with us silently out of the night. God speaks to each of us as God makes us, and then walks with us silently out of the night. These are the words we dimly hear. You, sent out beyond your recall, go to the limits of your longing. Embody me. You, sent out beyond your recall, go to the limits of your longing. Embody me. Flare up like flame and make big shadows I can move in. Let everything happen to you, beauty and terror. Just keep going. No feeling is final. Don't let yourself lose me. Nearby is the country they call life. You will know it by its seriousness. Give me your hand. Let us be steadfast, shall we, in our commitment to go to the limits of our longing, to not be afraid, to let our life flare up and be bright as we rely on the infinite moment to conscious moment, that we are steadfast in that and not losing that. Don't let yourself lose me. Namaste.